My name is Marcus Webb, and today I found out my wife has been lying to me for 8 years. I wasn't supposed to be home until Thursday. The Hart Field project wrapped 2 days early. Concrete pours finished ahead of schedule, inspectors signed off without a single revision, and my site foreman told me to take the time. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to surprise her. Maybe pick up flowers at the corner store on Pembroke, the ones she likes, the yellow ones with the dark centers whose name I can never remember. I pulled into the driveway at 2:30 and sat in my truck for a second just looking at the house. We'd bought it 14 years ago, right after we got married. Lauren had cried when she saw the backyard for the first time. She said it was everything she'd wanted growing up. I'd spent 3 summers fixing the porch, resodding the lawn, building a swing set that our older son eventually outgrew and our younger one still uses on Sundays. The silver sedan parked out front wasn't one I recognized. I figured it belonged to one of her teacher friends. Lauren hosts book club every other Thursday, and sometimes people park in front of the house instead of down the street. I didn't think anything of it. I unlocked the front door, dropped my bag in the hallway, and called her name. No answer. The house had that particular quiet that settles in when the boys are at school. But there was something underneath it. A sound I couldn't place at first, coming from the upstairs hallway. I stood at the bottom of the stairs with my hand on the railing, and I listened. I wish I hadn't. I didn't go up there angry. I want to be clear about that. Something cold moved through me instead. A kind of flat, mechanical calm that I've only felt once before, the night my father died. I walked up the stairs slowly. The sound got louder. The bedroom door was cracked open, maybe 4 inches. I didn't push it open. I stood there and I looked through that 4-inch gap and I saw enough. I saw more than enough. I turned around, walked back down the stairs, picked up my bag from the hallway, and left through the front door. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. Then I drove to the office. My assistant, Rhonda, has worked for me going on 12 years. She's seen me stressed, exhausted, furious after a bad inspection. She looked up when I walked in and her face shifted immediately, the way a person's face does when they recognize that something has broken and they don't yet know how badly. She started to stand. I shook my head at her. She sat back down. I closed my office door and I locked it, and I sat behind my desk and I put my hands flat on the surface and I breathed. On my desk, there are 2 framed photos. One is from a camping trip we took 4 years ago. Lauren and both boys in front of a lake in Colorado, everybody sunburned. All 3 of them laughing at something I'd said. The other is just the boys. Christmas morning 2 years back. Tyler in his pajamas holding up a remote control truck like he'd pulled it from the earth himself. I looked at Tyler's face for a long time. Then I called Derek. Derek Holt and I have been friends since we were 19 years old. We grew up 3 streets apart, went to the same high school, drifted apart for a few years when I went into construction and he went into law enforcement, and came back together the way old friendships do. He retired from the county sheriff's office 6 years ago and started a private investigations firm with 2 of his former colleagues. He is not a man who laughs often, but when he does it fills whatever room he's in. He answered on the second ring. I told him I needed help. I told him why. There was a silence on his end that lasted maybe 4 seconds, which from Derek is the equivalent of a long, complicated speech. Then he said, "All right. Don't do anything yet. Give me a few days." I asked if he needed me to tell him more. He said no. He said he'd heard enough to know where to start. That night I went home. Lauren was in the kitchen when I came through the back door, standing at the stove with her back to me. She turned and smiled, that easy, practiced smile that I've watched her aim at strangers at school fundraisers for years. "You're home early," she said. "The project finished ahead of schedule." "That's great." She turned back to the stove. "Dinner's almost ready. Boys are upstairs." I went upstairs. Caleb was in his room doing something on his laptop. He looked up when I came in, grinned, went back to his screen after a second. Tyler was in the hallway outside his room with a soccer ball, bouncing it off the wall in that rhythmic, absent way he has when he's thinking about something. He saw me and his whole face changed. He dropped the ball and ran at me, and I caught him and held him longer than usual. Over dinner, Lauren talked about the faculty meeting she'd had that afternoon. She talked about a student who'd been struggling with fractions. She passed the salad around and refilled glasses and asked Caleb about his history project. She was entirely normal. She was perfect. And I sat across from her, and I thought about the sedan in the driveway, and the 4-inch gap in the door, and I ate my dinner, and I said almost nothing. Later that night, after the boys were in bed, I went to our bedroom and I looked at the nightstand on her side. There were 3 framed photos there. One of the boys together, one of her parents, one of the 2 of us from our honeymoon in Savannah. I stood there looking at that honeymoon photo for a while. We looked so young. I'd had a terrible sunburn that day. I remembered being so happy it felt almost embarrassing. I went and slept in the guest room and told her my back was bothering me. The next 4 days were the strangest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I helped with homework. I ate dinner. I lay in the dark guest room listening to the house settle, and I did not let myself think too far ahead. Lauren watched me the way a person watches water they're not sure is safe to drink. She kept touching my arm, finding reasons to be near me, saying my name at the beginning of sentences in a way she didn't used to. I recognized it for what it was. Not love. Fear. Derek called on the 5th day. He didn't open with anything soft. He said, "Come to my office, today if you can." I sat across from him at 2 in the afternoon, and he laid a folder on the desk and pushed it toward me without a word. I opened it. His name was Nolan Shea. He and Lauren had dated all 4 years of college. They'd broken up 6 months before she met me. Or so she'd told me. According to what Derek had pulled together, they had never really stopped. There were records going back 9 years. Hotel stays. Calls. Messages recovered through a third-party service Derek used. There were photographs taken in the last 3 weeks. 2 of them together at a restaurant in Millfield, 30 miles from our house. 9 years. I sat with that number for a moment. "There's more," Derek said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the folder. I looked at him. "Tyler," he said, "I can't confirm it without a test. But Marcus." He stopped. He picked up a pen and set it down again. "Nolan Shea has a son. He's 9 years old." I didn't say anything. "Same coloring as Tyler. Same jaw. I'm not telling you it's definitive. I'm telling you what I found." He finally looked at me. "You need to get the test." I stared at the folder. Outside, a truck went past on the street. I could hear a phone ringing somewhere else in the building. The world was just going along doing what it does. "There's one more thing." Derek's voice had dropped. "And I debated whether to tell you this or wait." "Tell me." He exhaled through his nose. "Your mother knows." I looked up from the folder. I found a text exchange. "Lauren has a second phone, prepaid. She's had it for a while. 6 months ago, your mother sent a message to that number." He slid a printed sheet across the desk. I picked it up. The text from my mother's number read, "You need to end it with him. If Marcus ever finds out I knew, I'll lose him. You have to protect this family." Lauren's response, "I know. I'm trying. He keeps calling." My mother's reply, "Try harder." That's all I'm asking. I put the paper back on a desk. I have known my mother for 44 years. She drove me to every Little League practice. She sat in the front row at my college graduation. She was the first person I called when Lauren told me she was pregnant with Caleb, and she cried so hard on the phone that I had to ask her twice if she was all right. She came to the hospital when Tyler was born, and she held him in the recovery room, and she looked at me over his head and said, "He looks just like you did." She knew. I drove home that night, and I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. The lights in the living room were on. I could see Lauren moving past the window. I thought about going inside and saying nothing, the way I'd been doing for 5 days. I thought about calling a lawyer first. I thought about a lot of things. Then I thought about Tyler bouncing that soccer ball off the hallway wall. I went inside. I told Lauren the boys needed to go to Grandma's for the night. She looked confused, but she didn't argue. I don't raise my voice. I never have. When I use a certain tone, people who know me understand that it means something. She called her own mother, not mine, and within an hour, Caleb and Tyler were picked up. Lauren stood in the kitchen after they left and looked at me like she was already bracing for impact. I laid Derek's folder on the counter. I didn't say anything. I watched her face. She looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then she looked at me. Jack, she started. Marcus. She blinked. What? My name? It's Marcus. She closed her mouth. She pulled out a stool and sat down. I watched her try to figure out what I knew and how much of it, the way a person calculates distance before deciding whether to jump. When she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet. How long have you known? Long enough. She was quiet. Then, it wasn't supposed to go this far. 9 years, I said. That's pretty far, Lauren. She looked down at the folder and didn't open it. What are you going to do? First, I'm going to ask you straight out about Tyler. She didn't answer right away. She kept looking at the folder. I waited. I don't know for certain, she finally said. That's not a no. She didn't say anything. I sat down across from her. I kept my voice level. Did your mother know? She looked up. What? My mother. Did she know? Something crossed her face, something that looked like relief and shame at the same time. She figured it out on her own. I didn't tell her. I swear, Marcus, I didn't tell her. She put it together and she came to me and she asked, and I couldn't. She stopped. I didn't want to lie to her. But you could lie to me for 9 years. She didn't answer. I stood up. Get a lawyer, I said. I'm filing next week. She stood up too, quickly, and her voice changed. It got harder, the softness gone out of it like air from a tire. You can't just end this. We have children. We have a life. You built your life on top of mine. Those are different things. If you do this, she stopped, recalibrated. When she spoke again, her voice was measured, almost clinical. If you pursue this, you need to understand what you're risking. Caleb and Tyler are settled. They're in school. You want to tear that apart because of what? She set her jaw. I made mistakes. People make mistakes. You made the same mistake every few months for 9 years. I picked up the folder. That's a choice, Lauren. That's just a choice. She folded her arms. If you take this to court, I will make sure the boys understand who broke this family apart. I looked at her. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Her chin lifted. You think you can just walk away? You think a judge is going to look at a man who walked out on his family and hand him custody? You don't know how this works. I know more than you think. She reached out and put her hand flat on the counter, and her voice dropped to something almost gentle. Marcus, I still love you. Whatever you think about Nolan, about any of this, I chose you. I married you. Doesn't that count for something? I picked up my keys. Get a lawyer, I said again, and tell my mother I know. I went and stayed with my friend Pete and his wife Sandra in Millfield for a week. Pete and I served together for 2 years before I got out and went into contracting. He is the kind of man who opens his front door and just steps aside without asking questions. Sandra made up the spare room and put a glass of water on the nightstand, and that was it. No discussion. No performance of sympathy. The first night, Pete and I sat on the back porch until nearly midnight. I told him everything. He listened the way he always has. Completely still, no interruptions, just taking it in. When I finished, he said, the mother thing is the worst part. I told him I knew. He poured another 2 inches of bourbon into my glass without asking. We sat with that. Sandra, who is quieter than Pete but considerably more perceptive, came out at some point and sat down and said, What are you going to do about Tyler? I told her I didn't know yet. She nodded like that was the right answer. Then she said, Whatever you decide it because of who you are, not because of what she did. I thought about that for a long time after they went to bed. 3 days later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that go too. On the 4th day, she drove to Pete's house. She'd gotten the address from my sister, and she knocked on the front door, and Pete, who has the social restraint of a man who spent 2 years defusing landmines, let her in without asking me first. I came downstairs and found her standing in Pete's living room in her good coat with her hands clasped in front of her. And she looked at me the way she looked at me the one time I got a D in 8th grade math. Like she was both disappointed and frightened. Sit down, I said. She sat. She sat. I didn't yell. I never yell. I sat down across from her and I said, I want to hear from you. She told me everything. She'd found out 14 months after Tyler was born. She'd found a phone. Not Lauren's phone, but an old one in a coat pocket she'd accidentally picked up, and she'd seen enough to understand. She'd confronted Lauren. Lauren had cried and told her it was over, that it had been a terrible mistake, that she loved me and the boys, and that if my mother told me it would destroy everything. I thought about it every day, my mother said. Every single day, Marcus. I thought about calling you. I thought about, but you didn't. I was afraid of what it would do to you. You were afraid of what it would do to you, I said. Don't dress that up. She flinched. Maybe both. Tyler might not be my son, I said. Did you know that? Her eyes filled up. She nodded once, very slightly. I stood up. I need you to leave now. Marcus, I need you to go. We can talk when I'm ready. Right now, I need you to go. She stood. She picked up her purse. At the door, she turned back and said, You are the best thing I ever did. Whatever you think of me right now, I need you to know that. Her voice broke on the last word. I didn't say anything. I let her leave. I sat down on Pete's couch and I put my head in my hands and I stayed like that for a while. My lawyer is a man named Gerald Flatt, who's about 60 years old, lean as a fence post, and speaks in complete paragraphs. I'd worked with him on contract disputes before. He listened to everything I had to say, asked 4 questions, and made 2 phone calls while I was sitting there. Then he leaned back and said, We can file on the grounds of fraud. We can petition for a paternity test through the court, which will carry more weight than a private result. We can also, if the test comes back the way we think it will, make a strong argument for paternal deception, which affects the division of assets considerably in this state. He folded his hands. She's going to fight it. I know. She'll go for full custody and argue emotional abandonment. She'll say you left. I have 12 years of coaching Caleb's soccer league and driving Tyler to every dentist appointment he's ever had. Gerald nodded slowly. We build from that. The paternity test came back 4 weeks later. Tyler was not my biological son. Gerald called me at 7 in the morning. I was sitting at Pete's kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He read me the result. I thanked him and hung up. I sat at the table for a long time. Outside the window, Pete's yard was full of winter light, the kind that makes everything look clean and a little too bright. I thought about Tyler at 8 months old, falling asleep on my chest during a thunderstorm because he was scared, and I was the only one who could calm him down. I thought about the way he used to call me Daddy, the 2 syllables of it, the total trust in the way he said it. I thought about every school pickup, every fever, every nightmare that brought him padding into our room in the dark. Not my blood. Still my son. I called Derek. I told him what the test had confirmed. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, What do you want to do about Noel and Shay? Does he know? I think he suspects. My contact says he's been asking questions. That's his problem to figure out. Derek paused. And Tyler? I looked out the window at the winter yard. Tyler is 8 years old, I said. Tyler didn't make any choices here. Tyler is mine. There was a silence on Derek's end, and then he said, quietly, All right, brother. The mediation happened first. Lauren showed up with her lawyer, a woman who spoke very fast and used a lot of numbers. Lauren sat across from me in a conference room and did not look directly at me for the first 40 minutes. When she finally did, her expression was something I hadn't seen before. Not the fear, not the calculation, but something that looked almost like grief. I didn't let it move me. She offered joint custody with her as primary. Gerald declined on my behalf. She offered me every other weekend. Gerald declined again. She raised her voice, briefly, and her lawyer put a hand on her arm. She took a breath. Then she said, He's not biologically yours. You don't have a legal standing for full custody. Gerald set a page on the conference table and slid it across. 14 years of documented parental involvement, he said. Financial records, school records, medical records, testimony from teachers and coaches. In this state, the court recognizes psychological parentage independent of biology, particularly at this level of demonstrated involvement. We're prepared to argue it. Lauren's lawyer looked at the page. She leaned in and said something quietly to Lauren. Lauren's jaw tightened. This is going to hurt the boys, Lauren said, looking at me directly. You know that. They've already been hurt, I said. I'm trying to limit it. You're doing this to punish me. I'm doing this because Tyler asked me 2 weeks ago why Daddy doesn't live at home anymore, and I had to tell an 8-year-old that sometimes adults have problems they need to work through. I'm doing this because Caleb hasn't spoken to me in 10 days, and I don't know if that's because you told him something or because he figured something out on his own, and I'm not able to be there to talk to him. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because those boys need stability, and I am the stable thing in their life. Lauren looked away. The hearing was 3 weeks after that. I wore the suit I wear to project presentations. I sat next to Gerald, and I did not look at Lauren's table more than I had to. My sister was there. Pete and Sandra were there. My mother was not, and I had asked her not to be, and she had respected that. The judge was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had reviewed everything. She asked both lawyers questions. She asked me 2 questions directly. One about my work schedule and how I intended to manage it alongside primary custody, and one about Tyler's relationship with his biological father. I answered both honestly. My answer to the second one was that Tyler knew Nolan Shea as a family friend, and that I believed the transition of that information should happen slowly, carefully, and with appropriate professional support. I said I had already contacted a child therapist. The judge wrote something down. Then Lauren's lawyer made the argument that a non-biological parent seeking primary custody against a biological mother was extraordinary and required extraordinary justification. Gerald stood up and laid out 14 years and 40 minutes. He was methodical and quiet and devastating. He put the school records on the record. He put the medical records on the record. He called the testimony from Caleb's soccer coach, who had submitted a written statement describing the 53 games I had attended, the practices. The one Saturday when Caleb had broken his wrist and I had carried him to the car and driven 90 miles to the nearest pediatric orthopedic specialist. He put the therapist's preliminary assessment on the record, which described both boys as strongly and securely attached to their father figure and recommended minimal disruption to that relationship. Lauren's lawyer pushed back. Gerald did not raise his voice once. When it was over, the judge sat for a moment and looked at the papers in front of her. The courtroom was very quiet. I could hear the clock on the wall. She said, "Mr. Webb, the question before this court is not one of biology. Courts in this state have long recognized that parentage is built through action and commitment over time. What this record demonstrates is not ambiguous. The question is whether disrupting the children's primary attachment to their father figures serves their best interests." She looked up. "It does not. She awarded me primary physical custody of both boys. Lauren was granted visitation on alternating weekends and 1 evening per week, to be increased after a 6-month review if circumstances warranted. Lauren made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and her lawyer put her hand on Lauren's arm again. Lauren shook her head and pressed her fingers to her mouth. I sat very still. Gerald put his hand briefly on my shoulder and said, "We're done here." Outside the courthouse, in the cold air, Pete shook my hand, and Sandra hugged me without saying anything, and my sister cried into my shoulder for a solid minute. I stood in the parking lot, looking at nothing in particular. I did not feel like I had won. I want to be honest about that. I felt like a man standing in the place where his house used to be, looking at the foundation. Still there, still solid. But there was so much rebuilding to do. The boys came to me that Saturday. Tyler carried his backpack into the house and dropped it in the hallway and went directly to his room like he'd never left. 10 minutes later, he came back out looking for a snack. I made him a grilled cheese and we sat at the kitchen table, and he told me about a video game he'd been playing at his grandmother's. He talked for 20 minutes without stopping. I listened to every word. Caleb was harder. He sat in the living room that first evening with his arms crossed and said almost nothing. I sat across from him and I didn't push. Around 9 o'clock, he looked up at me and said, "Did you know?" "About Tyler?" "No," I said. "Not until recently." He was quiet for a moment. "Mom said you left because you were angry." "I left because I needed time to think. I came back for you." He chewed on that for a while. Then he said, "Tyler's still your son, right? Like even with the—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," I said. "He is absolutely my son." Caleb looked at me for a long moment. Then he uncrossed his arms. 2 weeks later, I drove to my mother's house. She answered the door and stood back to let me in and didn't say anything. I sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd helped me with homework 30 years ago, the same table where I'd told her I was going to propose to Lauren, and she put coffee in front of me without asking, and sat down across from me. I told her that I wasn't ready to forgive her, that I needed her to understand what 8 years of silence had cost. That keeping a secret to protect yourself is not the same as protecting a family, no matter how you frame it in your own head. She listened without defending herself. When I finished, she said, "I know." I told her that I wasn't going to cut her out, that the boys needed their grandmother, and that I wasn't going to use her exclusion as a punishment. I told her that I needed her to understand it would take time. She said she understood. I drove home. The house was lit up from the inside. Through the front window, I could see Tyler on the couch with his legs folded under him, a bowl of cereal in his hands, doing whatever 8-year-olds do in the evening. Caleb's bedroom light was on upstairs. I sat in the truck for a minute the way I had that afternoon 5 months ago, looking at the same house. Everything about it was different now, and also exactly the same. Same porch I rebuilt. Same lawn I resodded. Same windows. I got out of the truck and went inside. Tyler looked up from the couch. "Hey, Dad, there's still some cereal." "Thanks, buddy. It's the good kind." I checked. I took off my jacket and hung it on the hook by the door. "Then I'll have some." Caleb appeared at the top of the stairs. "Can we watch something tonight?" "Yeah," I said. "Let me change first." I went upstairs. I changed my clothes. I washed my face in the bathroom sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. Older than I used to be, tired in a way that doesn't go away overnight, but still standing. Still here. I went back downstairs and I sat between my sons on the couch, and Tyler handed me the remote and said I could pick, and Caleb pulled a blanket over both of them without being asked, the way he does sometimes without thinking about it. And I turned the television on and I didn't think about Lauren or Nolan Shay or my mother or the courtroom or any of it. I just sat there with my boys. That was enough. For that night, that was more than enough.